Hello students, welcome back to Daily Current Affairs Analysis by Civic Center IAS, where we shall discuss important relevant articles from the UPSC CSE prelims perspective, displayed at the articles which we are going to discuss today. The first article says that shortly after being sworn in on Monday, the US President Donald Trump signed an executive order cancelling the provisions of citizenship by birth, which could directly affect thousands of Indian professionals working in the US under H-1B and other temporary visas who hoped to raise their families there. Well, in this context, let's discuss about the differences between the US citizenship and Indian citizenship. See, citizenship determines the legal relationship between an individual and a state, conferring rights and their duties. While India and US share some of the democratic principles, their citizenship laws differ in the approach and application. And here's a comparison of the two systems. To begin with, in United States, citizenship is derived from the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution. On the other hand, in India, it is governed by the Citizenship Act of 1955 and articles like 5 to 11 of the Indian Constitution. And another major difference lies in the type of citizenship. See, the US allows dual citizenship, enabling individuals to hold citizenship of the other countries under certain conditions. However, India does not allow the dual citizenship. Instead, it offers the overseas citizen of India status, which grants some of the benefits without full citizenship rights. Next, in the US, anyone born on American soil automatically becomes a citizen, and this principle is called jus soli, or the right of the soil. In contrast, India applies restrictions to the citizenship by birth. For instance, at least one parent must be an Indian citizen and the other must not be an illegal migrant. Finally, the naturalization process also differs significantly. In the US, a person can apply for citizenship after 5 years of residency or even after 3 years if married to a US citizen. Meanwhile, in India, the process is more stringent, requiring 12 years of residency, including 11 years of continuous stay. Well, moving to the next article, it says that the neutral expert appointed under terms of the Indus Water Treaty 1960 decided that he was competent to decide on differences between India and Pakistan on the design of the hydroelectric projects built on the Indus Treaty rivers. India, in a statement on Tuesday, welcomed the move. Well, in this context, let's talk about the Indus Water Treaty. First, let's see the basics. See, it is a treaty signed between India and Pakistan regulating the use and distribution of Indus River system, and it was signed by then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and the former Pakistan President Ayub Khan in the year 1960. Interestingly, the treaty was brokered by the World Bank, which too is a signatory to the treaty. Significantly, the primary goal of the treaty was to ensure the equitable distribution of water from the Indus River and its tributaries, namely the Satluj, Beas, Ravi, Jhelum, and Chenab. Now, let's understand how water is shared. See, the treaty allows the three western rivers, that is the Indus, Chenab and Jhelum, to Pakistan for the unrestricted use. However, India is allowed certain non-consumption, agriculture and domestic uses from these rivers. On the other hand, the three eastern rivers, that is the Ravi, Beas and Satluj, are allocated for India for unrestricted usage. Moving on, the Permanent Indus Commission plays a pivotal role in implementing the treaty, as this is a bilateral body comprising commissioners from both countries who are tasked with overseeing the treaty's provisions and resolving questions, differences or disputes. And well, according to the treaty, the Commission is required to meet at least once a year to ensure effective management and coordination. Now, let's learn more about the Indus River system itself. See, the Indus River, also known as Sindhu, is one of the world's largest river basins and forms an important Himalayan river system. And it flows through the China's Tibet region, India and Pakistan, making it vital for the region's ecology and economy. In Tibet, the river is referred to as Singi Kambai, or the lion's mouth, and the Indus River originates from a glacier near Bokar-Chu in the Tibetan region in the Kailash mountain range close to the Manasarovar lake. Further, it flows northwest and enters India in the Ladakh region at a place called the Demchok. And once in India, it entered the river flows between the Karakoram and Ladakh ranges, and the river's tributaries are categorized as left bank and right bank tributaries. Know that left bank tributaries include the Jaskar, Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas, Satluj, and Panchnad rivers, whereas right bank tributaries include the Shyok, Gilgit, Hunza, Swat, Kurram, Kolam, and Kabul rivers. Finally, the Indus River empties into the Arabian Sea near the city of Karachi in the southern Pakistan. Well, moving to the next article, it says that after President Donald Trump's announcement that the US would exit the World Health Organization, the Director General of WHO said he hoped the country would reconsider the decision. In this context, let's talk about the World Health Organization, in short the WHO. Know that it was founded on 7th of April 1948, where a date celebrated annually as World Health Day, and it serves as a directing and coordinating authority on the international health within the United Nations system. The organization is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, and the decision-making body is the World Health Assembly, is attended by the delegations from all member states of the WHO. Now, let's take a closer look at the WHO's key functions. Firstly, the WHO coordinates international efforts to address the health challenges worldwide. Second, it develops evidence-based guidelines and standards to guide healthcare policies globally. Third, the WHO advances health science to improve disease prevention and the treatment. Next, the organization tracks global health trends and provides statistical data to inform decision making. Lastly, it responds to public health emergencies, including pandemics and natural disasters, ensuring timely interventions. Now, let's focus on WHO's collaboration with India. Know that India became a member of WHO on 12th of January 1948, shortly after its independence. Additionally, the WHO Southeast Asia Regional Office is located in New Delhi, making India a significant partner in the organization's effort. Further, let's explore the key areas where WHO and India work together. See, WHO collaborates with India on several disease control programs, including the tuberculosis through the National Program for the Control of Tuberculosis. Further, it also supports malaria by the National Strategic Plan for Elimination of Malaria, and also via the National Program for Control of HIV or AIDS, it helps in controlling the HIV or AIDS in India. And also, finally, the COVID-19 vaccination drive. In 2021, WHO partnered with Jammu and Kashmir to address vaccine hesitancy and conduct special vaccination drives to boost the coverage. Additionally, WHO works to reduce maternal and child mortality. For example, it supports the Pradhan Mantri Surakshit Matritva Abhiyan, which ensures free and quality antenatal care for the pregnant woman. Also, WHO collaborates with India to prevent and control non-communicable diseases like diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, etc. Also, know that the WHO promotes the safe and effective use of the traditional medicine. For example, WHO signed an agreement with India to establish the WHO Global Center for Traditional Medicine in Jamnagar, that is in Gujarat. Lastly, WHO is leveraging digital technologies to enhance health outcomes in India. For example, WHO supported the development of National Digital Health Blueprint, which aims to create a digital health ecosystem and improve the healthcare access. Moving to the next article, it says that the India and France have agreed to explore opportunities for coordinator surveillance, which list deployed to counter threats to the maritime security in the Indian Ocean region. The two countries also committed to support each other in maritime security engagements. Now, in this context, let's talk about the Indian Ocean region, in short, the IOR. See, the IOR spans from the eastern coast of Africa to the western coast of Australia, and it includes regions such as the Arab Gulf, East Africa, South Asia, and the East Asia. extending to the states of Malacca and the Southern Ocean Islands. Overall, the IOR encompasses nearly 38 countries, making it a vast and crucial region. Now moving on, see, the Indian Ocean acts as a vital transit route linking the east and west through the major choke points such as State of Malacca, State of Hormuz and Bab el Mandab. Now let's dive into why the Indian Ocean region holds such strategic importance. See, the Indian Ocean plays a key role in India's trade as it accounts for 95% of India's trade by volume and 68% of trade by the value. Further, coming to the energy security, it is another major factor as India imports 80% of its crude oil, which is approximately 3.28 million barrels per day via the sea. Including offshore production, the overall oil dependence rises to 93%. Additionally, India is the fourth largest importer of LNG with 45% of it arriving by the sea. Also, beyond the trade and energy, the IOR is also rich in the natural resources, where India is the third largest fish producing country, contributing 8% to the global fish production with a marine fish production total of 4.12 million tons. Furthermore, India has exclusive exploration rights in the Central Indian Ocean Ridge granted by the International Seabed Authority. The region is rich in minerals like the manganese, cobalt, nickel, copper and lithium resources that are critical for driving the Industrial Revolution 4.0. The next article says that in a crucial milestone in the development of next generation hypersonic munitions, the DRDO has successfully demonstrated a cutting-edge active-cooled scramjet combustor ground test for the first time in India. And this is the effort to develop a long-duration supersonic combustion scramjet powered by the hypersonic technology. Well, in this context, let's talk about the hypersonic missiles. Know that a hypersonic missile is a weapon system that travels at speeds of at least Mach 5, that is 5 times the speed of the sound. And it's maneuverable unlike ballistic missiles which follow a fixed ballistic trajectory. And if we look at the key characteristics, first, it travels at hypersonic speeds, that is Mach 5 or above. Second, it can adjust its course mid-flight to target precisely. Lastly, it does not follow a predictable arc like the ballistic missiles. Next, let's look at the two main types of the hypersonic weapons. First, we have the hypersonic glide vehicles. With a launch mechanism deployed from a rocket, it glides towards the intended target after being launched. Second, we have the hypersonic cruise missiles, which is powered by air-breathing scramjets and it requires the target and maintains sustained hypersonic speeds during the flight. Now, we have understood the types of hypersonic systems. Let's now dive deeper into the critical role of scramjets in the hypersonic technology. To begin with, the scramjet engine or the supersonic combustion ramjet is an air-breathing engine that sustains combustion at supersonic speeds. Unlike the traditional jet engines, a scramjet engine does not have rotating compressors or turbines. Instead, it relies on the high-speed airflow created by the vehicle's motion to compress air for the combustion. For this reason, scramjet engines are ideal for powering hypersonic vehicles. Now, moving to the next article, it says that this year the Ministry of Women and Child Development is set to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Beti Bachao Beti Padhao scheme, marking a decade of relentless effort to protect, educate and empower the girl child in India. Significantly, this milestone aligns with the India's vision of a Viksit Bharat 2047 and the global shift from women's development to the women-led development, which is a priority campaign during India's G20 presidency and now adopted by the Brazil's G20 presidency. In this context, let's talk about the Beti Bachao Beti Padhao scheme. Know that the Beti Bachao Beti Padhao scheme, translating to save the girl child, educate the girl child, was launched by the Indian government in the year 2015 to combat gender discrimination and promote the women's empowerment. And know that this is a joint initiative by the Ministry of Women and Child Development, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and the Ministry of Education. Further, the scheme comes with the objectives like improving the child sex ratio to ensure gender equality and women empowerment, further, to prevent gender bias, sex selective elimination, and also to ensure survival and protection of the girl child, lastly, to encourage the education and participation of the girl child. Well, moving to the next article, it says that Vijay Kumar KS, a 39-year-old software professional, made a remarkable 211 crore from his stock investment worth 150 lakh in over 10 years, only to lose it through a digital arrest scam, the police said. And a big chunk of the money is suspected to have been sent to a man abroad through the Hawala trade, they added. In this context, let's talk about the digital arrest. Know that it is a sophisticated cybercrime tactic where fraudsters impersonate as law enforcement officials to deceive individuals into believing they are under the virtual arrest. The scam involves coercing victims into staying connected via the video calls, during which they are manipulated into transferring money or divulging the sensitive information. Next, let's break down the step-by-step method that scammers use to execute this fraud. First, the scammers contact the victims, often posing as officials from agencies like the Central Bureau of Investigation, Enforcement Directorate, or local police. Next, once a contact is made, they make victims falsely informed of their involvement in serious crimes such as money laundering or narcotics trafficking. Further, the victims are coerced into continuous video communication, effectively placing them under a digital arrest. Lastly, under the guise of avoiding physical arrest, victims are pressurized to pay substantial sums of money. Moving ahead, the next article says that relocating villagers to create spaces for tigers in tiger reserves should be taken up on priority while taking care of needs of forest dwellers during the process, said by the Union Environmental Minister Bhupendra Yadav. And he said so during the National Tiger Conservation Authority's meeting in Dehradun last month, minutes of meeting reviewed by the Indian Express show now. Well, in this context, let's talk about the National Tiger Conservation Authority. Know that it is a statutory body in India responsible for overseeing and promoting the protection and conservation of tigers and their habitats across the country. Further, the NTCA was established in the year 2005 under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, following the recognition of urgent need to strengthen the country's efforts in the tiger conservation. Significantly, it operates within the framework of Wildlife Protection Act 1972 and the Tiger Conservation Plan, which aims to address the major threats to the tiger populations in India and ensure their long-term survival. Next, let's explore the key powers and responsibilities of the NTCA which enable it to fulfill its mission. First, the NTCA approves management plans for all tiger reserves in the country. Additionally, it oversees their implementation to ensure the effective management of the tiger habitats. Second, the NTCA provides financial assistance to the states and tiger reserves for various conservation activities, and this includes funding for anti-poaching measures, habitat restoration, and infrastructure development. Third, the NTCA acts as an advisor to the central and state governments on policies related to tiger conservation. Moreover, it guides the implementation of the Wildlife Protection Act to enhance conservation efforts. Finally, the NTCA has the authority to suggest stricter laws or regulations in areas where the tiger populations are under the threat. And this ensures that appropriate legal measures are in place to safeguard tigers and their habitats. The next article says that researchers at the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, Pune, and other institutions have developed a dengue early warning system that can predict the potential outbreaks. Well, in this context, let's talk about the dengue. Know that dengue is transmitted to humans through the bites of infected female Aedes mosquitoes, and particularly the Aedes aegypti is the primary vector. Though Aedes albopictus has also gained prominence, particularly in the Europe. After feeding on an infected human, these mosquitoes require about 8 to 12 days to become capable of transmitting the virus, depending on the environmental conditions like the temperature. Further, humans with high fever can infect mosquitoes, which can carry the virus up to 2 days before symptoms appear and 2 days after the fever resolves. Next, let's talk about the symptoms and severity of dengue. See, in mild cases, symptoms include high fever, severe headache, muscle and joint pains, rash and nausea. Most cases resolve within 1 to 2 weeks without complications. However, in severe cases, symptoms include severe abdominal pain, persistent vomiting, rapid breathing, bleeding gums or nose, fatigue, and blood and stool or vomiting. This form can be fatal if not treated promptly, making early diagnosis crucial. Now, let's understand how dengue is diagnosed and treated. Currently, there is no specific antiviral treatment for dengue. Instead, pain relief is managed with paracetamol, while ibuprofen and aspirin are avoided due to the risk of bleeding. Further, in cases, hospitalization and supportive care are required. This includes intravenous fluids and close monitoring to prevent the complications. Finally, let's discuss how we can prevent and control the dengue. So, to protect yourself, use mosquito nets, repellents, and wear protective clothing. Additionally, avoid the outdoor activities during the peak mosquito activity, which is typically during the daytime. And at a community level, environmental management is essential to eliminate the mosquito breeding sites. For example, ensure clean water storage containers and use insecticides in high-risk areas. Additionally, for high transmission areas, the Qdenga vaccine is approved particularly for children aged 6 to 16 years. Meanwhile, other vaccines are currently under development to expand the prevention options. Now, the last article of the day says that the Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana is a government initiative aimed at promoting the financial inclusion of young girls in India and securing the future, especially in terms of education and marriage, which was launched on 22nd of January 2015 by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi as a part of Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao campaign, and this scheme has successfully transformed the financial security landscape for millions of girls across the country. Now, in this context, let's talk about the Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana. See, let's take a closer look at its key features. To begin with, the scheme is available for the girl children who are Indian residents. An account can be opened any time from the girl's birth until the age of 10 years. However, only one account can be opened per child with a maximum of 2 accounts per family except in the case of twins or the triplets. Next, let's talk about the deposits. As a minimum initial deposit, you can start an account with just 250 rupees. Further, the additional deposits must be in multiples of 50 with a minimal annual deposit of rupees 250. And the limit is 1,50,000 and any excess amount will not earn interest. Also, the deposits can be made for up to 15 years from the account opening date. Now, let's understand how it's work. See, interest is compounded monthly and credited annually based on the lowest balance between the 5th and the end of the month. Importantly, the interest rate is determined by the Government of India and may be revised periodically. Moving on to the maturity, the account matures 21 years from the date of opening. However, early closure is permitted under the special conditions such as marriage before the maturity with the proper documentation. Know that for the withdrawals after the age of 18 years or completing the class 10, the account holder can withdraw up to 50% of the balance for the educational purposes, and these withdrawals are allowed once a year for up to 5 years with the documentation like admission, confirmation or the fee receipts. Finally, the premature closure is allowed only in the exceptional circumstances such as the death of the account holder or the guardian. In such cases, the balance along with applicable interest is paid to the guardian. However, no premature closure is permitted within the first 5 years of the account's opening. Now that we have covered the features, let's look at the impact and growth of the scheme. As of November 2024, over 4.1 crore accounts have been opened under the Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana, and this initiative represents a significant shift towards the empowering girls through the financial inclusion. Moreover, it supports the goals of Beti Bachao Beti Padhao campaign, which focuses on empowering girls and creating an environment conducive to their education and social development. Well, we have discussed 10 articles for today and we'll be back tomorrow with the other current affairs analysis. Thank you.